Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to David Taplin.
Thank you, Brian, for your welcome. It was interesting to sit through a meeting with very rapid propositions of motions and their voting, rather than using the consensus model, which I'm more familiar with from the Uniting Church. I will say in my preface that my talk will primarily deal with property issues for the Uniting Church, rather than looking at matters of organisational responsibilities or other issues which I could draw upon. Brian mentioned the Uniting Church as being one in the centre of the town, and at one stage a small group of us used the book called Church in the Marketplace by, I think it was Bishop Carey, as a means of trying to find a focus for staying downtown rather than moving to a green field away. And Brian said that we had worshipped at the Tod Street Uniting Church. Coming in from the college, we bypassed Williston and we came to Gawler because Fran had a friend there in Bev Trelaw, who had been a Catford at Glenunga, where Fran had been in her teenage years. So thank you, Brian. In the early days of Gawler, lay Methodists met as a fellowship under the guidance of several lay preachers, and the Gawler town was included on the circuit, on the preaching plan of the Adelaide circuit, but then in 1950 was transferred to the care of the Kapunda circuit. I guess at that stage Kapunda was blooming because of the copper, and of course the traffic from the copper mines through Gawler down to Adelaide was a significant commercial activity. It's recorded that meetings were held in a schoolroom in 1848 under the leadership of John Jones, who was a layman, a blacksmith and a wheelwright from Lancashire. Gawler, and our particular focus is this little fella here, alongside the foodland that I'll continue to say, alongside the supermarket that I'll continue to call Foodland for many years, until I get around the fact that it's no longer Foodland, but it's Drake's. Now, the proprietors for the town of Gawler had made available a block of land for the Wesleyan Methodist Church. I should say the proprietors were those group of gents who had financed the purchase of land and its consequent subdivision by purchasing, and they were required to make available some land for public works in the... Should start again. The parcel they bought was both rural and Gawler, and the Gawler parcel, from their Gawler parcel they had to allocate some land for roads and other public amenity, including land for churches. So that was the situation. And they offered the Wesleyan Methodist Church some land somewhere near the Eagle Foundry in King Street, but it was considered to be far too remote, and so a block of land at the corner of Tod Street and Scribner Terrace was purchased. The first church was built in 1850, and that building still functions as the Opportunity Shop. The church was quite small. Do I talk in feet or do I talk in metres, Brian?
Whatever.
Whatever. Well, I can give you the two of them. It was 13.9 metres or 40 feet long by 7.6 metres or 25 feet wide, and seated 140 people. Now apparently when the building was first proposed, it was going to be shorter, but the fellas that did the building decided they'd bump it up from 30 feet to 40 feet because 30 feet was too short. So it was a bit of initiative which they took, and that was subsequently proved to be still too small. Now this is thanks to Mr. Google, to use Fran's trusty stick. Here we have Tod Street, Shrivener Terrace, Parklands and River here. This is the first church that was built with its subsequent elaborations, which we'll talk about in a minute. This is the church building and the new hall, about which I'll speak later. I'm not talking about the manses or the minister's residences at this stage, but this place that it was is now a preschool facility was the first manse that was built for the ministers of the Methodist Church. Subsequently they purchased Tortola House, and Tortola House proved to be beyond the needs of a family at present, and so we purchased the property up in Hutchins Street. So that's a sketch which I've seen on a number of occasions, and I pinched this copy from Janet Hillier. It was one of the photographs that it was photograph of a sketch that John had. It tells a slight fib, I think, because if you look at the front today, you can see that there are coins marked distinctly on the front around the windows and the door, but there's no distinct coin on the side, although it's depicted there. That's the front of the existing building, and it's sad for me to report to you that the bell in the bell tower was successfully nicked, unlike the villains that had a go at the Lutheran Church. And you can see here, this is the first church, and then there were additions. And the first addition was this addition that goes from there to there. I describe it in my book as being transepts, although the transepts are quite shallow. Just a doorway and a wall, not much more. But it's a high, lofty, cavernous place at the end. And one stage they were doing some repainting, and one could see carefully in the... I might move my lectern so that Brian's not growling at me all the time. On the distant wall, now if you go into a number of Protestant churches, you will see across the front of the church, above the sanctuary, a banner of some sort. And at Sandy Creek you do, and at Williamstown as well. We don't have one currently in the current worship centre we have. But if you look carefully, you could see a ridge in the paint on the far wall of this extension, such a banner. This was taken from the scaffolding, and you can see this is the extension, and then this building came on later. There is a terrible box gutter running along there, and those of you who know box gutters and them being blocked and causing flooding will have some pity on us, I hope. And this shows the back of the hall from Scrivener Terrace, because that's, in addition to the, I'm running out of my sequence properly. This is the extension to the hall, to the church. Then more recently, this two-storey classroom facility was added, and then more later again, where have I got a figure? In 1959 there was a brick extension put out the back, and that provided a stage, 2 change rooms and a communicating corridor backstage. Soon after, Reverend Thomas Lloyd was appointed in 1857, it was resolved to build a new and larger church fronting on the Tod Street. The footings were dug out, foundations were laid, and the work stopped because the either the district superintendent or the connection officer instructed that the church needed to provide a parsonage or a manse. And so nothing more was done on the site over the road from this place for a period of 10 years, when work began properly again. So in August 1867, building work began with the formal laying of a foundation stone in the east corner with considerable ceremony. The stone was a large slab of slate from the quarry of Mr. Clement, who also donated the general building stone for the walls of the church when they came to be built. The trustees planned to build the new walls in stages, the first quarter in 3 months, to halfway in 6 months, to 3/4 in 9 months, and to be completed by the end of 12 months. Now, the architect was probably James McGeorge. Are there lots of Scots people here? It would seem that Scots people can either be MCs or MACs, and they may have a capital letter for the second bit or not. I've seen this name spelled MC George or McGeorge, capital M and the rest lowercase. Now, James McGeorge was an architect who was responsible for a number of other significant churches. He was the architect for St Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Wakefield Street, which later became Willard Hall. Morn Methodist Church, its first iteration, not the second one, which has now been demolished. And congregational churches of Port Adelaide, Glenelg and McLaren Vale. And an interesting thing was that he was successful in a competition in a design for Mitchell Building, which is the, if you like, the front building of the University of Adelaide. But so he won the prize, but then the university decided to use the plans of the bloke that came second. So he lost out on that deal. The masons for the project were Messrs Manifold and Pimblock. The carpentry and seating of the new church was carried out by Taylor and Forgy, and the original windows were designed by Mr. C. Brooks. The completed building was 24.4 or 80 metres long by 14.2 or 50 feet wide and 23.2 or 30 feet to the ceiling, and the height outside from the ground to the top of the pinnacle was 23.2 metres or 76 feet. And there was some suggestion that the design was made 1 foot bigger than Perry Street as a bit of one-upmanship that existed back at that time. The completed building was one of the largest Methodist churches outside of the city and cost £3,294. And Reverend Arnold Hunt, in his History of Methodism in South Australia, says, quote, "The size and the cost of the church reflected the prosperity of Gawler and the vigour of Wesleyan Methodism." The official opening of the church took place with considerable ceremony on the 21st of March 1869, some 150 years ago this year. At the time of opening, not all the new pews had been installed, and pew rents were 3 shillings per quarter for new seats and 2 shillings per quarter for old seats. And it's up until recently that some of the pews have had the little metal holders for the card that indicated whose pew it was, as was the style of the day. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the old church now. So this is the old church, now an op shop with a store and a counter. This was the extension that was made, and this is now often used by UCare, who also have the offices on the ground floor, 2 offices and the kitchen. And as I said to you earlier, the stage area was an extension, and it's since been redeveloped. That's quite a recent development. We'll get to that at some stage. I told you all the glorious things I've done. This was my attempt at producing a floor plan from some other architectural drawings in order to provide the evacuation procedure for UCare. It was some fun messing around with a computer. So that's the church, and it's from a Marchant postcard. That's the front of the church. It's not all that well seen. What I want you to note, please, is the length of the finials on the 4 finials and the height of the bell tower, because the next photograph is one which is after the bell tower's been reduced in size and the finials have been reduced. More about that later, but that's one of the few photographs which show the front. And the other significant thing to note is that you can get some gauge of at what stage the photographs were taken by the height of the Norfolk pines at the front, which now are shown only by a metre square of bitumen in 2 places. Now the Gawler Wesleyan Methodists were joined by 2 other branches of Methodism. The Primitive Methodists established a small cause on Church Hill in 1865, and the Bible Christians established themselves at Gawler West in 1858. And then a smaller Wesleyan church was built in Williston in 1867. It was almost a daughter church of the Wesleyan church that we're talking about in Tod Street. Now there were 4 branches of Methodism in Australia at that time, and they joined together in January the 1st, 1902, to form the Methodist Church of Australasia. And I might say that a similar amalgamation occurred in the United Kingdom, but it took another 30 years for it to happen. So we're good in arguments. So from 1828 from 1928 until 1960, there were two circuits in Gawler, one based on the Tod Street Church and the other based on the Gawler West Church, both with smaller churches from nearby integrated into the circuit. So the Gawler circuit at that stage was, I might be telling a fib because I know at one stage Smithfield was involved, but certainly Williamstown, Williston and Tod Street would have formed one circuit, and the other circuit was probably Gawler West, Angle Vale, Gawler River, and I think Virginia and Two Wells are probably a separate circuit in their own right at that time. Now the next work to be undertaken in 1925 was the construction of the two porches on the west and east doors towards the northern end of the church, and the organ chamber was built and a pipe organ of 840 pipes and 17 stops was installed, and the church was repainted. Now, sorry, it's another photograph of the front of the church, or from the front, and these are the two porches, which are quite some way down towards the back. I've not seen a photograph with those side porches not in them, not in the photograph. So this shows the floor plan of the church with more recent organisation at the front, but there's these two porches which my colleague Gavin Riggs talks about as the wind porches. I guess they do keep the wind out. Although if you sit down the front as Fran and I do, and these two doors are open, you get blown away. Now, during the ministry of Reverend Walter Stafford, who was in placement for from 1962 to 1968, the sanctuary area was remodelled from the traditional one, which saw the pulpit in the centre, high and lofty, with descending tiers of choir seats, and then the organ console in the middle. Now this is, go to this one. It's very difficult when you're trying to photograph something that's already been printed and not get too much fuss. The pulpit's up here. These are the tiered seats for the choir, and this, I think, is the music on the console of the organist, and it must be a festive occasion of some kind, and there are vases of flowers everywhere to obscure your view, mine and the choir's. But that's a traditional seating pattern, and you'll still find it in some churches. Now it was modified from that to this. Now in this pattern, the pulpit is a separate structure. It was donated by the Hewitt family, Mary Hatcher's folk. There were some choir stalls over on this. There was a raised area over on this wall where the choir could sit. The communion table has now become more substantial, and it stands on a small raised area on another raised area with a communion rail on three sides, broken in the front with a panel of communion rail that could be inserted when a communion service was being held. Now, I'm not sure whether this represented I'm not sure whether this represented a transition from the significance and the key focus on the preaching to one which is more sacramental and liturgical. I'd like to think that was the change. Anyway, that was the change which happened during Stafford's time. And you'd also note that it was graced at this time with long hanging pendant fluoro tubes, which would have been an absolute nightmare to try and change. 1977 saw the union of the Methodist Church of Australia, the Congregational Union of Australia and the Presbyterian Church of Australia to form the Uniting Church in Australia. Now in Gawler, the members of the Tod Street Congregational Church and St Andrew's Presbyterian Church had already been worshipping together as a united parish since 1967, and I think John is suggesting to me that Sandy Creek as a congregational church was part of that united parish. And then in 1967, and these folk joined with those of the Tod Street Methodist Church to form the congregation of the Tod Street Uniting Church. Now the Methodists were a top-down mob, and if the majority of circuits voted in favour of union, we all went in. The congregational churches and the Presbyterian churches, because of their structure, were able to vote and come in one at a time, or if they chose, they could stay out. Now we had the anomaly in South Australia of the mother church of the Presbyterian Church, Scots Church, came into union. And most of the congregational churches came in, but some of the Presbyterian churches not. I've got to stop, so we can... No.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Oh. So that's why you can find continuing Presbyterian churches, and in fact the Uniting Church made available a former Methodist church in Archer Street, North Adelaide, to be a Presbyterian church for the folk of Central Adelaide. Where are we up here? In 1991, more work was found to be necessary. There had been the collapse of some of the, or a threatened collapse of some of the large mouldings of plaster which demarked the ceiling in the Tod Street Church. Gavin could tell me that one piece came away at the front and someone went up with the piece and a bucket of mortar somehow and managed to attach it. But there other bits were threatening to come away. So the work that was done involved putting an aluminium extrusion along the bottom of the moulding and then lacing it with stainless steel wire back to the rafters above it. At the same time, we took the opportunity of removing the pendant fluoro tubes and having lights above the ceiling, and since this work was being undertaken by Ian Berryman, a heritage architect, he insisted that we might also look, if we're going to repaint, why don't you repaint in the original colours? So paint scrapings were taken and the original colour scheme was reinstated.
Stop the clock.
I'll put my glasses on. Thank you.
I mentioned that the architect was Ian Berryman, but the work itself was carried out by Ori Builders of McGill, who had worked on several other heritage projects in the city. And I should say that since that time, the congregations at Gawler River and Virginia have disbanded in 2001 and 2008 respectively, and some of their members have also joined the Gawler congregation. Now, in response to the growing needs of UCare, an outreach agency of the Gawler Uniting Church and the statewide or nationwide Uniting Care, in 2005, partition walls and a false ceiling were built within the church hall to provide an office and a reception area. Now before any major building work on the church property was planned, it was deemed necessary to have an engineering survey made of the original church building. And I think it's fair to say that there had been some monitoring for some time and some concern about the bell tower gradually leaning back. And if you find a very early photograph, you'll find that it once stood up straight, but it was gradually leaning back. And the reason for the lean back eventually, I think, was solved because if you looked at the thickness of the front wall, it might have been this thick, and the front of the bell tower was flush with the front wall, but the bell tower was thicker, so you had this mass cantilevering away from the front towards the rear of the building. There was some concern about the bell tower, and the report advised that the bell tower might be removed and perhaps we could put back a fiberglass replica, which has been done in some places with heritage buildings, and the lean corrected. Or the bell tower reduced in height and the lean corrected, and that was the track along which we went in 2003. In addition, the four finials along the front gable were repaired, reduced in height, and the reinforcing rods, which would have been mild steel and were showing some spalling, were replaced with stainless steel. And you might say, well, what happened to the cracks in the masonry? What happened with the cracks in the masonry is they put a temporary plaster over the front of the cracks and then injected an epoxy resin into the cracks, and then after it had set, removed the surface covering and repainted. The bell tower, they thought at one stage they'd have to lift it off and bring it down and work on it, but what they in fact did, with a crane, they held the bell tower secure, chopped through underneath it, lifted it up, took out some courses of bricks, put in some packing pieces and dropped it down again. Reduced the height that way. And then the cavity where the bell had been, they put in Hebel brick and render, which is why when you look at some of these other photographs more recently taken, you can't see a hole where the bell was. The bell hopefully is still in the shed where it might one day be put into a freestanding bell tower. Now, while the I'm sorry, I've missed two bits out. I've carefully planned what I'm supposed to be doing. We tried to preserve the memorial windows from the Cowan Street Church when the Cowan Street property was sold. Two of the windows, these two, were installed in what's now the Gawler Uniting Church, and another one went out to Sandy Creek, where it's in an internal fixture with as a panel backlit with fluorescent lighting. So they were preserved. And we also moved the memorial honour rolls that were at both the Presbyterian and Congregational churches. So there is some recognition of the work that's been done there. And that's another closer view of the front of the church as it stood at that time. Now the inspection involves someone going up in a crane and making as part of the survey. And when the survey proper started, the building, front of the building was shrouded with scaffolding, and that shows the completed work. As I said, the finials now are shorter. The Synod Property Office had some concern about if we get another earthquake, those finials that you've got are going to collapse out the front, and we're not sure what damage they'll do. So that was the reason for the finials being reduced in height, and we certainly needed to repair the cracking and replace the mild steel rod. And you can see that the bell tower now is blind. There is no hole through it. It's been locked in. But I still think there's perching room for pigeons, which seem to be one of Gawler's tourist attractions. There was also a steel frame put inside the front gable to strengthen it, and these I think are where the bolts go through from the front to the back. Now with the repair work for the church in order, planning for the new hall on the site of the no longer used tennis courts begun in earnest. After 5 years of planning, approval was given to commence on the new hall, which was formally opened on the 23rd of November 2008 by the moderator of the South Australian Synod, Reverend Rod Dyson. The architects for the project were Hodgkinson Architects of Adelaide, who had undertaken a number of church buildings, and the builders were Cox Constructions. Now this was the design which we finished with pretty well, I think. The paving didn't get carried over this far, but this is the new hall, and I'll mention later the fact that we planned to put a playground out there and had this U-Butte swimming pool fence stuff around it, and then found that the equipment we had was too big.
Oh.
So Brian's pushing me back the other way now. I was going to say it's not going to be a song and dance routine, but it's almost that, isn't it? So that was the design at some stage, and this was the finished job. Looking at it from the Dundas Street corner, you'll notice it's got an interesting roof line. And I can take you on a quick walk through. That's the reception area. And Fran might weep because at one stage along this wall there was a row of 5 bookcases and a library. This room is the youth room. That room is the kindergarten area, or it's the equipment for the play group that meets on a Monday. We badly needed a decent kitchen, and we've got a kitchen now of commercial standard, with a coffee machine for those who are addicted to espresso and its variants. And that's inside the hall itself. This bit out here, you'll notice there was a lean-to panel at the end in a different colour of metal type material. And the architects were keen to have these two windows to provide a cross as part of the design. We took considerable care with the kitchen, in that you can see here there's a servery into the foyer, a servery into the hall, and there's a servery around on the outside to go outside if there's an occasion when people want to have coffee outside, which doesn't happen very often. Now this is to show that the architects and the builders took considerable care to use stone similar to the stone that was used in the church building, and you get a better idea from here with stone as the lower part of this section of the hall and over here. One of the tasks that was a requirement was that we needed to landscape the hall and the car park. So a group of volunteers removed the old fencing and the tennis backstops. I think someone rashly bought some of the material of the tennis backstops, and we also had to put in a watering system. We grew hedges of Grevillea olivaceae. They were planted along the Tod Street and the Dundas Street boundaries, together with a small number of Manchurian pear trees, which currently are in flower. And the garden bed behind the Tod Street hedge was planted with shrubs, mostly eremophilas, which have grown to be giants. And then there are several low hedges bordering the internal paving, and they've been planted with lavenders and rosemaries. And of course, if you've got hedges, then sadly someone's got to cut them. So this shows the olivaceae and a pear and the internal hedges of rosemary and lavender. And part of the reason for the requirement for the hedge as a soft fence was there was concern by the council that cars leaving and arriving and leaving at night, their headlights would annoy the neighbours across the road. Now this hedge is now about this high, and it's got to be, and it will come back with a bit of luck. The other hedge along the Dundas Street edge, along the Tod Street front, was cut back to the point where I thought it'll never come away again, but mercifully it has. So this hedge needs a similar treatment, and it's most likely to occur within the next 2 weeks. Now, provision was made in the ground plan for a fenced playground to be near the southwest corner. However, the fenced area didn't provide enough fall space around the equipment that we had purchased. So it was decided that the playground equipment would be erected in the area between the western wall of the church and the eastern end of the hall. So the fence was moved and the playground equipment erected in that area, and where we had intended was subsequently paved. So that's the fence around the area that we had planned. And this is a navvy digging a hole for the new fence. And here are some people, including Barry Littleford, digging the holes to put it in. Put the playground equipment in. We had enough fall space and filled it up with soft fall bark chips. Now, with Holy Communion no longer served at the communion rail because of the reduced mobility of people in the congregation, and the pulpit only occasionally used for preaching, the minister in particular preferring a mobile lectern and a radio microphone, and also the wish to have other instruments lead some of the singing, in 2011 the floor in the sanctuary was taken to one level, and the step between the sanctuary and the nave was widened, and the sanctuary and the nave were then recarpeted, as were other areas in the nave, and the timber and panelling of the pulpit were recycled to build a sound desk for the audio-visual control equipment. So this now shows the floor at one level rather than having two steps. Some of the communion rails now being put along the side as a protection against precipitation. The step was widened and as an afterthought almost, safety tread was added along the edge. So it's now an open space for a freer form of worship than that which might be constrained by set space for a pulpit. And that's the recycled panels from the pulpit. Ken Edwards did a very good job doing that. In the same year, 2011, the stage in the former hall, now the administration centre, was removed to provide space for an office for the parish, as well as internal toilets, shower and laundry for use by the church, UCare workers and UCare clients, and also by the op shop if they've got some clothing that they think would benefit from being washed, then there's a laundry there to do it. Later improvements for the work of UCare included the renovation of the kitchen to one of proper standard for the handling, storage and processing of food items, either cooked or ingredients for distribution to the UCare clients. Then the disaster struck. In 2013, a large part of the lath and plaster ceiling located towards the northwest corner of the church collapsed and made, when you've got 100 and something years of dust on top, it makes a considerable mess. Fortunately, the damage was confined with one of the, I'll call them the panels of the ceiling, and the repair was effected by removing all the ceiling in this panel and replacing it with modern materials and repainting to match the existing paint finish, as well as putting in the ceiling bits. They also had to add some spacing, some packing as well, because the plaster and lath was, sort of this thick, very heavy stuff. And my comment was that the tacks that held the lathes up to the rafters were only about that long, and we should have gone back to Taylor and Forgy and demanded compensation for the shoddy work and the oversight in using very short tacks. Now, fortunately, we had people who were prepared to undertake the work within the congregation, so we had the expense of hiring the scaffolding, and that was all it was. But once again, while the work was being done, the morning congregation met in the adjoining hall. Now in 1915 our property committee was fortunate to have the input of the Living Skills Initiative. They did work at several other churches around the town, I'm sure. Major work was carried out to dispose of storm water from the church and near the U-Care kitchen, so we either brought the water out to the road, or in one case we put it into a soakage hose underneath the landscape area at the back. In addition, they extended the paved walkway to the car park and built a retaining wall of concrete sleepers and steel H-section posts to allow us to fill it to give a level surface, and then by erecting a fence with gates to enclose an area that was secure for children. In the past 2 years, the church was successful in obtaining grants under the Fund My Neighbourhood scheme to fund the purchase and erection of a comprehensive set of playground equipment, which is now installed to the north of the hall in the area that was fenced several years earlier. The previous playground equipment was dismantled and removed from the area. It's been donated to the Williamstown Church, who have yet to put it back up again. And the area between the hall and the church now have a number of raised garden beds. That's the playground area at the back of the church, back of the hall. And these are the raised beds. I was a bit sceptical, firstly on the grounds that they needed to make sure that there wasn't too much water in there to cause movement of the clay in the soil and cause cracking of the walls. And also, as you can appreciate, between these two, between this quite tall building and the hall, there's not too much sunlight gets in. Anyway, that was their choice. So right at present we have a fine suite of buildings on the north side of Tod Street, which are used by a number of church groups as well as community groups. And on the south side we have the Opportunity Shop, the administration office for the parish, as well as offices, kitchen and stores associated with U-Care, an agency that provides charitable support and counselling to residents of Gawler and its surrounding districts. It must be said that the building work undertaken and maintained over 150 years has been done by members of the congregation giving their time and skills as well as funds. In the last 50 years, the maintenance of the property has been coordinated and largely done by Reg Baker and Dennis Doody. And the writer recognises the long service given by Grantley Oates and Gavin Riggs to the property committee. In brackets I've got a note. The writer is indebted to those responsible for the booklet produced for the 100th anniversary of the opening of the church for details of the church's development before 1969. And I can also report that in his research he found an error in the Hignett and Coe's Gawler Heritage Study Stage 1, published in June 1982, in which it was claimed that the building of the church, the Tod Street Church, was financed by William Wincey. He certainly was treasurer to the trust and may have been a considerable donor, but I'm sure he didn't pay for it out of his own pocket. So that was an error in fact. Perhaps in conclusion I could say that it's important that the current people in the congregation of our church and any church must realise that they're indebted to the work of many people in the past who have laboured long and hard to both build and maintain those properties. And another bit of information which I turned up during my preparation for the 150th anniversary was a recommendation from an American congregation that you should have a significant anniversary every 25 years so that each generation hears the story once again. And I found that to be a good idea. So we've had a 150th anniversary. I won't be here for the 175th. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think we'll finish it there. We've learnt so much tonight. Thank you, David, and I'll ask Mari on behalf of us all, to thank you for all of the mighty effort you've made tonight.
David, on behalf of everyone here tonight and the Gawler History team, thank you. Your research is...
You're in strife too.
I am. Thank you for your research.
Depends which camera we're
I
looking
know.
at, doesn't it?
We'll have to look ahead.
Yes, yes.
I'm lucky enough, as part of the Gawler Visitor Information Centre guiding group, I get to go around to the churches, and I've been able to go into the Uniting Church. 2 weeks ago we had a group of people from our Hope Valley Church. There was 11 of them. As I walked up to the Uniting Church, the organ was playing. Gavin Riggs was in there, and I said, oh, hang on a minute. I just checked. No problem. We walked in. He played as we walked in. One of the church members that was there started singing the hymn because she knew it. And we sat down and we were treated to a most magnificent mini concert by Gavin. We're very, very lucky in Gawler, and I'm sure that the 175th will be celebrated. By the looks of your hall, you've got a lot of young people coming through as well, and I think just your volunteers and your congregation obviously just love your church. So congratulations and thank you for presenting tonight. And we have a lovely gift there, but you might want to get someone to help you carry it out to the car. It's quite heavy.
Can I just add, one day I went into the church to do something fairly simple, and I had Stephen Kaysler, who you may know, race up until push me out, and then he made an explanation that there was a woman playing the pipe organ, and her performance was being recorded on video to be sent to the Royal College of Church Organists in the UK for evaluation. And I'm told she got very good marks. So my interruption must have been momentary and not significant. So the facility is good.
Thank you, David.
Oh, thank you.